Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Partner Track Diversity in Entertainment panel. This panel is part of Amherst College's Asian Alumni Weekend, co-sponsored by the Office of Advancement and the Asian Alumni Network. Thank you for joining us here today, whether in person or over live stream. Partner Track is a novel written by Helen Wan, class of '95. Now a Netflix television series, Partner Track is the embodiment of diversity in entertainment. We are so thrilled to have Helen here with us today, along with the cast and crew of the Partner Track.
Just the three of us.
We're equally thrilled to have Jeff Lang here as our moderator. Jeff has been observing, exploring, and writing about the Asian American community for over 30 years now. He launched one of the first Asian American national magazines, A Magazine. And woo! And he now writes regularly for The Guardian, CNN, Slate, and elsewhere. He has written and edited 3 books, and he has co-authored several other books. A few years ago in Los Angeles, I actually attended a book signing for one of Jeff's co-authored books. So I have a signed copy of Rise, A Pop History of Asian America from the 90s to now. It's one of my favorite books on my bookshelf, and it's an incredibly artful, informative, and inspiring read. Jeff, thank you for being here and moderating this important conversation. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hey, It's actually the 3rd anniversary of Rise, crazily enough, just this last week. First of all, thank you guys so much for having me here and having our fantastic panel. Thank you, Jenny, for organizing this, and thank you, Helen, for thinking of us and bringing us all together. Delighted to have this conversation, not just because the Partner Track itself is a remarkable show based on a remarkable book with some remarkable people in it and associated with it, but also because this conversation about diversity in entertainment is one that feels very urgent and relevant today. And we're going to be talking about it from the lens of what diversity brings to the screen, what it means in terms of storytelling, in terms of actually performing, in terms of the journey that people take to get to the point of being creators. So this really isn't about programs or initiatives or campaigns. This is really about diversity being people, because we're diversity. Diversity is just us, right? I'm going to begin by just, introducing the panel very briefly, literally just giving their names, and then asking them to share a little about their own journeys. And I'm going to begin with Helen, of course. Helen Wan, who, as you know, author of the books that some of you guys hopefully have had the chance to take a look at. There are copies sitting out here. Helen donated 50 copies.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Macmillan.
Check it out. So Helen Wan. To her left is Hollis Meminger, who's a cinematographer of the Netflix series. Yeah. Alexandra Turshen, who played Rachel in the series. And Desmond Chiam, who plays Z on the series. So let's begin with that, quick walk through how you got here. Helen, and then the rest of you, let's begin by talking a little about your background, some professional highlights, and maybe just a single word that sums up your career to date.
One word.
A single word that
Single
sums
word.
up my professional... unpredictable.
Unpredictable.
Or serendipitous. Because if you had told me, I'm coming up on my 30th reunion year this year, my husband and I. And we both, my husband and I, are class of '95. And if you had told me back then, when we were students walking around the quad here, that at this point in time, I would be a published novelist and have had the good fortune to have a Netflix show of streaming that is based upon that novel, I just wouldn't have believed it. So I guess in one word, it would be unpredictable. And just in a nutshell, how I got here, when I was a student here at Amherst, I was an English and poli-sci major, and actually Dean Van Lever, who is sitting right there, was my instructor for English 11. And so probably a lot of people here know that if you are a double major in English and poli-sci, then you'll take a lot of classes in this building, in Johnson Chapel, and also Converse, and also sometimes Chapin. And so it's kind of like a great, very surreal and happy moment to be back on campus and be in Johnson Chapel with all of you folks, because I I lived in Pratt dorm 2 out of the 4 years that I was in school here. And so I knew exactly how many minutes it took to print out your paper, double-spaced paper, and then book it down the stairs and then come to Johnson Chapel and turn it in before 4:30 p.m. in these little cubby mailboxes downstairs by the entrance. And a couple of times I was cutting it very, very close, and the professor would come and be collecting them right as I was like, like, oh, cutting it a bit close, Ms. Wan. Like, yeah. But so anyway, after double majoring in English and poli-sci here, I went to law school, and not due to some burning desire to be a corporate lawyer, frankly, but I, being the first generation Asian American kid, kind of grew up with the notion that there were 3 possible career tracks that were okay, medicine, law, I don't know, engineering, perhaps finance, maybe things have changed. But, and I thought, well, what am I passionate about? I am passionate about the English language. I'm passionate about books. I'm passionate about the written word. And out of those, I guess lawyers work with words. So, right? So
exactly the same thing. Sorry. Exactly how I ended up as well.
Exactly.
Literally word. That's crazy.
Literally, that was as far as the calculus went. So I ended up taking the LSAT and did well enough that I got into law schools and picked one where I got in-state tuition, a very good deal, at UVA. And then I thought, well, what is the quickest path to pay off my student loans, my student debt? And I was lucky enough to get offers at large New York firms. I picked one. I picked one because at the interview, they were trying to sell the fact that they had a booming and thriving entertainment law practice, media and entertainment law practice, which they do, but everybody all the new attorneys wanted to work there. And so I stayed there for only about less than 2 years before lateraling over to a media and entertainment IP law boutique. And then from there went in-house to Time Warner. And worked with Jeff, actually, at Time Inc. Back in the day, so.
That is amazing. We'll talk also about how you transited from there to actually being an author, but I'll ask that question later.
Yes.
Hollis, how about yourself?
Am I doing the one word?
Start with the one word, yeah.
Curious.
Curious.
I'm still curious. I was lucky enough to meet her son, and I felt like whenever I'm around kids, I feel like a 5-year-old. And I feel like a 5-year-old when I'm on set. I'm just, I want to touch stuff. I want to play with gadgets. I think when I was younger, I would call myself a closet nerd, but I think I'm out of that now. I think I'm officially that. and I'm okay with it now. I think as a kid, I wasn't, because, you, like Helen said, I mean, I don't really think it matters where you're from. I think most first generation college students, I think I was the first person in my family to go to college and actually graduate. I think the pressure of stability is what everyone puts on their kids. My parents, it was medicine, law, or the military. Most of my family members were in the military, from Vietnam to wherever. But I definitely did not want to do that. I went to Georgetown. I was a psychology and English major who was really curious about medicine in a different way. Like, I don't know why, but I just was. So I was telling before this that I worked in the med school and while I was an undergrad, and I spent most of my time with med students, and I was like, this is actually kind of cool. Like they get to, they had better food than we did, in the regular dorms and stuff. And then I think I ended up graduating. I worked at an outpatient occupational therapy clinic. I worked for a physical therapist, started to go back to school so that I could apply to med school because it was sort of a late, idea. And then one of my good friends passed away, and I ended up moving to New York to do something different. It's like, I'm just going to move to one of the most expensive and craziest cities. I think I had $500 in my pocket, but I had a plan, right? I was like, I'm going to go there. I'm smart.
Choice.
But I'm going to go there, and I'm really smart. And it was like, none of that mattered. It was like, no one cares, So I landed in New York City, had a friend that had an apartment in the Bronx. She was gone for a month and had given her rent money. And I was like, all right. So, of course, in my Georgetown education, I sat down and I'm like, I'm going to create these goals. I'm going to write down every single thing that I'm going to do week to week. And I'm going to run out of money in 30 days. But I'm going to make it in those 30 days. That first week, we were told to get out of that apartment. Wow. And I was like, now what do I do? Yeah. I was like, now I have no
That's
money.
New York, baby.
That $500 is now smaller. Now I'm like, but anyway, short story is obviously I stayed. I've been in New York now since 1997, and I'm in the film business. So we can talk about the journey at some point.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Wow. From having $500 in your pocket, living in New York, to being homeless and not having $500 in your pocket, and then still making it in the film industry.
Yeah.
That's kind of magical. Alexandra, let me ask about your journey.
Yeah, I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was not doing theater. I was really focused as a young dancer. I danced briefly with the Washington Ballet Company, one season. And I accepted my spot at Mount Holyoke College. So I am a moho. Any mohos? No. Okay. But while at Mount Holyoke, I missed performing, and so I took my first theater class, and I fell in love. And ironically enough, I also spent a lot of time at Amherst partying with the Zumbies because I was in an a cappella group, and I've even performed on this stage. It's very fun to be back. No dancing banana, sadly, but shout out to the Zumbies. So yeah, I started performing. I did theater, and yeah, so I love doing these kind of things because we learn so much about our friends. But yeah, my senior year, I wasn't going to mention this until you mentioned this, but my father died, and that was my aha moment. I had been on a track going to law school, actually. I was studying international human rights. I was very interested in helping people in the biggest way possible. I was very interested in stories and struggles and wanting to help make a change in some way. Learned a lot about international human rights from a Mount Holyoke alum, Kavita Ramdas, who came and she gave a talk in my senior year. And that's in that moment is when I realized that I for sure was not cut out for international human rights law. And then with coinciding with the death of my father, I sort of had this like, oh my gosh, I think I just need to move to New York and be an actor and just see if I can make that work. And I think I had like $600 in my bank account. And, I moved to Crown Heights, and and I've been there, here in LA ever since. And man, oh man, the one word, I think I'm just gonna say, like I wanna say roller coaster, but I think the real word is faith. Because this career is so full of ups and downs and heartache that the only thing I think really that's keeping us going sometimes is just having faith in yourself that you chose the right track and that you chose the right path for yourself, and that you have faith that that you have what it takes to make an impact and to help those people and to somehow incorporate all those things that you love about humanity and the world and human rights and people and my love of story. Like somehow, I just have to have faith that somehow it's all gonna make sense eventually, one day.
Faith will pay off.
Yeah.
And has. Desmond, how about yourself?
I hate going last on these things because my story got stolen. Literally, I'm not even kidding you. I ended up in law the same way. I was like, I like English. It's the only subject I like coming out of high school. And law also uses words and English. So there I go. And then my word was going to be faith. So now I'm like, it's cool. It's been cool. Like, this is the kind of career that will bring you joy if you like let it every day. It can bring you a lot of not joy if you let it, but generally if you stay on the right side of things with faith, you'll be well rewarded for it. But man, my story is so not interesting. I was just a lost kid who, like, by the grace of a lot of very cool people around me, like, kind of made his way through, like, you know, truly, like, just by, when I say I'm like standing on the shoulders of giants, there are so many giants, and I'm thankful to every single one of them. So, you know, that's mostly it, is being open. If you don't know the way, like being open to people who do and see something in you and have a way, not a set path, not like you have to do this, but just kind of like, hey, let me guide you through this thing that maybe might be for you. I think that's, being receptive to that has been my biggest gift. You know, through again, no shrift of my own. It's all everyone else, you know. Yeah.
I love the phrase "standing on the shoulder of giants." I myself stood on the shoulders of people who were about 5'3", but nevertheless, you know, got here.
It's a different giant.
But let's talk about converging on this particular show, because the partner track, and again, those of you who have seen it or who have seen the book, you know it is the story of a young woman, Ingrid Young in the book, and Ingrid Young in the series, and her ambitions and how they kind of intersect with those of other people, their agendas, and ultimately both, you know, a heartbreaking moment of failure and maybe a moment of tremendous triumph at the end. And through it all, she has romances, she makes friends, she meets mysterious people who change her life. And it's a lot of fun. But it's also something which is rare in Hollywood, certainly at that time, which is a show centered on a young Asian American woman and lensed a narrative, entirely lensed through that perspective. So let's talk about how that happened, and we'll begin with Helen, because obviously you were there before the series even existed. How did Partner Track find its way to the screen?
Well, to make a long 12-year story short, Partner Track began as my own personal diary entries, my journal scribblings, my stress-busting activity on the subway on my commute to and from my law firm job. And what prompted these scribblings was just some patterns that I was observing at my first job, my first job out of law school, which was at a very large New York law firm where I was assigned to the corporate M&A group. And I just started seeing these patterns emerge, right? Like who was grouping with whom in the law firm cafeteria? Who was being invited along on certain client pitches and certain squash court reservations, and who was not? Hint, I was not, okay? And so I started just kind of like scribbling about these observations, and when I had amassed just basically a critical mass of pages in these journals, I showed them to a couple of trusted friends, dear friends. Actually, a couple first readers from my class here at Amherst, who were not lawyers, not necessarily lawyers, but who said, hey, this happens all the time, no matter what the industry, you know, and this ran the gamut. And so my friends started saying, hey, maybe you should try to get these pages published, perhaps as a collection, perhaps as a book of essays. I thought, well, I don't really know anything about how to get a first book published, especially when you're this kind of like no platform, unknown, And remember, this was in the days before social media, right? Before Instagram, before everything. And so I literally followed some friend's advice, literally got a book that was how to get a first book published for dummies. I mean, not to date myself, but I went to a brick and mortar bookstore, I got one of those books, and I was a diligent little law student, so I followed the instructions, and lo and behold, I did get offers of representation from following those instructions in that book.
Those dummies books, man.
Underrated series.
Yeah, and I met with these 3 agents. I picked one, and basically only 8 years later, I got a book deal. And in between, there was a lot of heartbreak. I mean, no one goes into arts or entertainment or media expecting no rejection. Right? Like, that's just part of the...
I mean, I was kind of
I was pretty naive, actually. I didn't...
It's like, this is going to be great. I'm going to be an overnight success.
No one's going to say no to me.
Yeah, no.
So obviously, there were a lot of rejections along the way, and a lot of them were for frustrating reasons, which will surprise no one probably in this room. That we were like, well, we'd love to do this. It's very unique. We love the writing, we love the voice, but how would we market this, and to whom? Who would be the consumer? Who would be the readership of this kind of book? You have no platform. You're this nobody, kind of like just out of law school person, toiling away at a large corporate firm. We just don't know which bucket are you trying to be in? Are you trying to be Scott Turow? Are you trying to be John Grisham? Or are you trying to be Amy Tan?
Wow.
As if those were, pick one. Like an a la carte Chinese menu, right? Like, pick one. And I, actually, and my agent also at that meeting said, does it have to be one of these pre-existing buckets? Can it just be its own thing, right? And people were not willing to take risks on that, or people wanted to take risks, but wanted to know, was I willing to make some creative content changes? And I said, sure, I'm open to feedback, good suggestions. And one suggestion from a very seasoned publishing professional was, well, what if you rewrote your manuscript, but from the point of view of a white woman? I was like,
Wow.
And so my agent, who by then knew me quite well, was like, do not let me handle, right? And he's like, well, have you read the book? Because that would really kind of change the entire thing. That would change the entire message. And so we did not go with that particular publisher. And an agent, another very seasoned agent, who she called me and she said, I never do this, but I'm calling you to turn down your project. And I was like, thanks, thank you. And she said, and I'll just say this, obviously it's personal preference, but my personal preference is that I have a big pet peeve about when people only want to write about their ethnicity. So again, I did not go with that person.
I called you so I could hear your reaction on the phone when I said this.
When I said no to you.
I needed to communicate this verbally to you.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but ultimately, I did find my wonderful editor, Brenda Copeland at Macmillan, and she got it. And she said, no, we're not going to rewrite anything to make the protagonist white. No.
Oh, yeah.
So.
I mean, this is one of the things I think that is really critical when talking about diversity in entertainment, right? It's not just about trying to kind of curve fit. It's not saying, oh, we're going to do Amy Tan meets Scott Turow, right? Which unfortunately is how Hollywood works. It's always like, pitching things like, this is Amy Tan meets Scott Turow. You're telling a distinctive story from a distinctive place. It's hopefully, it's authentic. It is speaking from a perspective that you're knowledgeable about and interested in. This, especially what the agent who turned you down said about it's a big beef to me when people only want to write about their ethnicity. Well, I suspect that that's only something that people who are ethnic get asked, right?
Right.
It's like, you're white. Why do you write about white people? Nobody says that, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine there's also something to that for actors as well. I mean, it's, I'm going to ask both of you guys, we'll begin with Desmond actually. How did you find your way to the project? But then in the course of that, how did you actually react to the opportunity in some ways to play a role like Z, sort of mysterious and powerful, CEO of this company?
Extremely.
Kind of a dreamboat.
Super easy because I'm like that person already.
Not really acting.
Not at all. I came in very late in the project. I don't know if you remember, Helen, but it was I think you guys have been shooting for 2 months already or something like that, and they were looking for Z for a long time. I'd been aware of the project for about 3 months, 4 months at that point. By the time I actually auditioned for it. But then once I auditioned, it happened very quickly. They were like, "We want you in New York next week," and which happily I did, because to the second part of that question, not often that type of role comes along for guys like us, which I'd made a career up until that point playing either villains or himbos, which is an interesting spread, but it's I'm definitely more a himbo than the villain necessarily, but it was nice to. This was the first character who had like a dignity, like actual dignity, and wasn't trying to make himself a joke. Like it's not like I was doing like Long Duck Dong in other parts, but it was like, he was always like, he's the funny guy in the group, and then like he's maybe the also ran choice for the romantic interest. Whereas like with this one, it was a lot more solid. Even talking with Georgia early on, it was like. We played it very coy in the first season, and that's part of the tragedy of not getting the second. Is second season was going to be stepping into that kind of
Hot. It was going to be hot.
it was going to be hot. It was going to be a Z Ingrid thing. And that was why we it was a huge opportunity to jump in and say yes on a well shot, well produced, properly competent team as well. To have all those stars kind of come together is rare, and it was very, very gratifying. It was really, really nice to have that part. Come along, and who knows when such parts will come along again, because they're still rare. It's not every day that you're getting character parts which have the opportunity to evolve into a leading man or just leading man parts. A lot of it, when you're Asian, you still just get the character parts. Which are also great. There's plenty of character actors out there who have built entire careers and really, really interesting careers, and I love doing that kind of stuff too. But man, those leading man opportunities, they're very heartening, I would say, to see and have offered. Yeah.
And for those of you who have seen the series, or hopefully will see it when you go home, it is very clear, like you said, that Z is being set up again. He's an absolute dreamboat. There is
makeup had its work cut out, man. I was in there for 2 hours, and it was a lot of fun.
And that notion of typecasting is obviously something that isn't just about race or ethnicity. It's also, in many cases, about gender and about Hollywood's expectations of gender. I'm going to ask you the same as in terms of how you came to the project, Alexandra. But I actually thought some of our conversation about the career that you had built before that was really interesting, especially from the context of where you started. I mean, here at Mount Holyoke, right? So, yeah, if you could share a little bit about that. I mean, what it was like first being in women's college and why you chose that college, and then what it was like then transitioning to Hollywood with its expectations.
I think where you're leading me to go here is Mount Holyoke being the opposite of the male gaze, and then straight into the beast of Hollywood, which is like a lot of the male gaze. Yeah. I see what you did there. Well, all I can say is everyone's journey is so different. I graduated Mount Holyoke on a wing and a prayer, moved to New York to try and find the door to Hollywood to see where, it took me a long time to find that door. And in the meantime, I was just doing lots of indie films, lots of student films. And I would say that I cut my teeth doing really low to no budget student films and indie films in New York, and I really, that was my education, and I did everything. I didn't say no to anything. I learned so much. Eventually, I started to see, eventually, I would say 5-6 years in, I finally got an agent, and that was wow, a big moment for me. I was still not in the union. I wasn't really going in for anything legit and or paying, I would say. But eventually I started to make my way into, I guess my first bigger break would be Red Oaks, which is, we talked about that. I was in a 80s bathing suit for 3 seasons. And that was a pretty big shift from the freedom to be, how do I thread this exactly? At Mount Holyoke, I felt very free to be all of who I was, right? I wasn't the girl that was worried about any kind of male gaze, not just because there weren't men around, just because I knew I was at an institution where what was valued was very much between my ears. And I boldly and bravely raised my hand in class, and I challenged professors. I had ideas. I was really proud of the essays I wrote. I loved the major minor that I created, and then to go into an industry where it felt like those kinds of things and all of that I had churning inside me and all the ideas that I had weren't necessarily of as much importance and didn't have, there wasn't a lot of value there, at least at the time. Certainly as a very young actor in New York who really didn't know what the hell was going on. That was, I guess, a pretty big shift. But as you become more seasoned in the industry and you start to click into more roles that match your essence, your vibe, your, what's the word?
Well, who you are, who you're comfortable with at your core, right?
Sure, your facility, your package, what you look like, and but also, eventually it does start to feel like those ideas, those shows that you're really meant to be a part of, do somehow find their way to you, and that's how I felt about Partner Track, because when I got that email, this live audition. This was during COVID, so this was in my mom's basement. Riding out code with my kid and my husband in my mom's basement. Wow, what a time. More on that later, or not. But when that email came in, just like you have a live audition, and I read the script, I thought, oh my God, I just felt like, oh, this is it. I'm Rachel. I'm this fiercely loyal, loving, badass, smartest girl in the room, best friend, ally, who's gonna be calling you out on your, what. And I just felt absolutely just totally thrilled that in a time that was kind of scary, definitely scary as a new mom, to suddenly be thrust into the pandemic with a newborn, also feeling like maybe my career is over for a number of reasons, not just COVID but also being a new mom in the industry. I didn't know how that was going to go. I didn't know if there was still a career waiting for me on the other side of new motherhood.
Yeah, Hollywood is brutal that way.
Yeah.
Specifically that way.
To women,
which is
terrible.
Yeah.
And so, I was thrilled that Partner Track came in. I felt ready for it. Preparation meets opportunity meets just, I nailed it. Like, I nailed that audition. And then I didn't hear from them. I did, y'all, I did. But then I didn't hear from them for like almost 2 months. And so I just like the drop of, oh my gosh, like I can't believe. And I knew they were filming in New York. And then a week before Wheels Up, I got the call that I got the part. And it was so confusing and so happy and so crazy, because at this point I had a 17-month-old and I was like, wait, what? Moved to New York but in the middle of a pandemic with my baby, and I have this part, and this like, it was like crazy, exciting, amazing, and it's all felt so right, and it still feels right. I mean, it's just one of those dream projects that like I do wish we had had the opportunity to keep going and to keep digging deeper into the story, into these characters, and to keep spending time with these like good people we met behind the camera, in front of and behind the camera. But yeah, it just like exists as this little like incredible bubble of
Moment in time.
yeah, a moment in time that we all super cherish and have like a special place for in our hearts.
Well, Hollis, I want you to fill in a little bit of the gap between Georgetown and going to New York, and then arriving at your new career, of course, and eventually to the partner track. Between, you know, being kicked out of the apartment and partner track, you know, gained a set of skills, as they say, both on the technical side and experience in the industry, and rose to the position of director of photography, of cinematographer. What was that like? I mean, it's a little bit different to be in the craft side of the business, to need to have that technical training, not least because there's apprenticeship. You know, you need people to believe in you. You need people to actually bring you up and give you those skills, because frequently people don't necessarily go to school to learn these things. You learn them on the set and on the fly. And I want to hear a little bit more about how you got those chances.
From Georgetown to like my first job.
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't think we have enough time for that.
First paying job.
Okay, no. So no, it's actually a really interesting story. Like, I think when people ask me, and I have to think about it, you know, sometimes when you're in it, you don't think about how hard it is. You just do it because you know this is what you have to do. And then 25 years later, I've been in the business now 25 years, I look back and I'm like, wow, like that's a long time. And then when people who are interested in it, that go to film school, or especially now, you know, a lot of film school students that I speak to, and then they find out I didn't go to film school. And it's like, how did you end up here not having gone to film school? Because apparently there's this linear path, right? Which doesn't really exist, I don't think, for any of us, clearly. When my best friend from high school, when he passed, it was a very, very difficult moment. It was like a pivotal moment for me. Because either I could go to med school and do something that I wasn't really, really interested in, or I could take this opportunity and kind of find myself, right? Because there's always that, like you get to go find yourself when you get to move to New York or something. So I had this, I think it took me about 2 weeks. I stayed home from my job. My boss, who love him to death to this day, Edward Lee, he was my boss at it was the physical therapy center, and he called and he said, I understand. And I said, I just need some time. And, you know, if I don't have my job when I decide to like wake up and go back to work, he's like, no, your job is here. I was making $7 an hour. So it wasn't like this thing that I was giving up that was monumental or life-changing, but it was an experience. So I think after that 2 weeks, I called him and I said, you know, I think I'm gonna go and do something completely different. And I don't know what it is, but I know it's somewhere in New York, and I'm gonna go look for it. And again, my plan was I had 30 days. I had everything mapped out. I went and I bought groceries, had enough food for the, you know, we're talking spaghetti and, you know, ramen noodles and the things that weren't that expensive. But I had enough, right? And I had, I think it was $150 or $200 bartending class that I saw in the newspaper, if anyone remembers what a newspaper is.
Me too. I did that too.
You know, they did exist.
I took that class.
It was a bartending class that said, you know, upon completion, you get your certificate, and then like all these jobs are supposed to come, right? So, of course, and I will preface Georgetown quite a bit in this conversation, I'm a college graduate. I'm not getting anything less than 100 on a bartending class. So I studied, and of course, I got 100 on this bartending class. And the instructor goes, you know, can we just have a conversation? She's like, no one really does that. Like, why are you here? And I was like, no one does what? And she said, no one gets 100 on a bartending class. You shouldn't be here. Like, we're bartending. You're like pouring drinks, right?
Bro, you're wasted.
And I had the bartending book. I'm in the library. I'm taking notes. I have cards. You know, I have index cards. I'm doing everything I did in school. I'm like, all right, I'm going to post this up in this place. And I'm like, all right, you know, Cosmo is this, and you know, B-52. I literally had all these notes. So I ended up going to, I would say, 100 different restaurants. And everyone's like, you have no experience. You have no experience. You have no experience. You have no experience. I'm like, they told me if I got a certificate in bartending, that there would be a job for me. So now, once again, I'm a college graduate. Why can't I get a job in a bar, right? So I'm questioning like why I'm in New York City, right? Even though the path, I don't know what it is. So I finally go to this place in the village. It was called Greenwich Cafe. It was right on 7th and Greenwich Avenue. It was across from St. Vincent's Hospital. I go in there super late. There's 2 bars that are open 24 hours, coffee shop being one of them, and what became my new job was the other one. So the bar manager says, you don't have any experience. Now I'm pissed because I'm like, this is 101. I have no more money. I'm out. Like, what am I going to do, right? So I get this. I said to him, I said, can I just ask you one question? Before you got experience, how did you know what an experience was? And I'm like, I'm never going to get the experience if I don't get the experience. Right? And he's like, well, that's a good point. So I got the job, and I was a bar back. So that was getting ice and cutting lemons and making those fancy lemon wedges and stuff that you put up next to an espresso, which I had no idea was. I have to be honest, I did not have, you know, we had regular coffee. I didn't have an espresso. So anyway, I end up getting this job, and I'm working the day shift, which you made Bloody Marys. So again, I got 100 on a bartending class, and now I'm making Bloody Marys, which is tomato sauce, I feel like, or tomato juice and a little bit of alcohol. And I'm making cappuccinos and espressos with a lemon twist. So people don't, you know, it's $1.20. People are giving, like, there's no tip on $1 and some change. So I'm like, I'm not making any money. This is terrible. So nighttime bartender quits. Now I have both shifts. So now I'm like, oh, I actually have a job now. So now I'm in the back of the bar. Someone comes in, asks for a Cosmo. Sex in the City was huge. So Cosmos were huge. So I'm literally behind the bar, like, I'm making my first Cosmo for somebody. And I forgot what was in it. So now I look in my notes.
No, the 100.
I'm like, 100 right here. I got it. And I make these Cosmos. And next thing you know, everyone's flooding in for Cosmos. Then it's Halloween. Now I have a line out the door. And now there's like famous people coming in. And there's this person coming in. And late night, there's all these, it was so many things happening all at once. I'm like, I have made it in New York. I'm a bartender. I'm doing great. So anyway, I meet these guys that work in film, but they're on the technical side. And during the daytime, we play chess in the corner because no one's in there. And they're like, oh, you should, you know, check out, you know, this place called Panavision, which is a rental house that rents camera equipment. And I'm like, sure. So I walk into Panavision one day, I look in and there's all these lenses, all this camera stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. But I'm like, I make more money at the bar. So do I pick a career or, you know, again, because I'm a Georgetown graduate, so I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life now. So anyway, I put an application in. There's a 6-month waiting list. And then I finally get this phone call. Hey, there's an opening at Panavision. I'm like, looking at how much I'm going to make. And I'm like, I just made that last week. But I had to make a decision because now I know I can't work at this bar forever. And I actually, the kind of closet geek in me came out when I saw these cables and all this camera equipment. I'm like, ooh,
First
like,
thing you remember is
so
cables.
whatever you get excited about, I'm like, look at all these cables and stuff. Like, what does this do?
This man is still very protective of his cables.
Very protective
Just
of my
FYI.
cables.
Don't tread on the cables.
Very specific about cables. So anyway, I end up talking to these guys, and I realized how much I know about film, but I didn't know that I knew what I knew about film because no one was, I didn't have any kind of friends that were geeking out with me, and I'm like, they're like, no, you know a lot more about the technical stuff than you think. So anyway, I ended up getting a job at Panavision. I had saved enough money, at the bar to be able to make it through that first year at Panavision. And I remember taking a photograph my first week in New York, and it was this camera car. So if you're familiar with like watching films, people will put a car on top of another vehicle and drive around and all these lights and stuff. So I had a camera very similar to that, but I think it was disposable. And I was taking pictures of this thing. And about 6 months into working at Panavision, this guy comes in that looks like a miniature Gandalf. He's short, but he's got like beautiful gray hair, white hair, and he comes in and he is like, hey, you know a lot about this stuff. I'd like to take you out of here. And I'm like, oh. And then I go back and I remember, and I pride myself on my memory and I pride myself on visuals. And I'm like, I've seen this guy before. And I try to figure out where I remember him. And it was the photograph I had taken almost a year prior. He was on that camera car. He was my first boss.
Wow.
Like full circle, first boss. So anyway, I ended up going and doing like the Up in Smoke tour with all the fancy rap artists from early 2000. And they had really good food. And I said, this is the business that I want. And I ended up, shooting, going from a prep tech to an assistant, or from a prep tech to a loader to a second assistant to a focus puller to an operator to eventually becoming a cinematographer, and kind of bookending my career from a focus puller to a cinematographer happened on a TV show Younger. I started that show as an assistant. I ended that show as show being nominated in a multi-camera category for an Emmy for season 7 of the show, which is odd for me because I'm like, oh, I didn't think I had no idea that was going to be my career. And to bring me to Partner Track, a lot of the same people that produced, were kind of around in production were similar to the people that did Partner Track. So they asked me if I was available, and of course I said yes.
Of course.
The lesson here is if a miniature wizard walks into your
Take a picture of
says,
him.
"Take my
That's your
hand.
boss.
Follow me.
Just say yes.
Follow the wizard.
Yeah, follow the wizard.
Well, I actually think that is the lesson because in so many ways, Hollywood and entertainment industries in general are about this kismet that occurs. When you spark a relationship with somebody, when somebody wanders into a setting where you recognize them or they recognize you, where you form bonds for no reason whatsoever, and then all of a sudden those end up paying off downstream. And I think that especially for people who are not traditionally or conventionally associated with certain opportunities and roles, people who don't have necessarily the old boys network or old girls to rely on, that kind of kismet is so much more important. I want to actually skip ahead now a little bit because I know we're running out of time. This conversation, unfortunately, has been so intriguing. We could have gone on forever. But I do want to lean into now this question of the obstacles you faced and whether any of them really kind of played into some of those expectations that you encountered as somebody who wasn't necessarily traditionally seen as being the center of the screen or having an opportunity in this business. And that also plays into not just identity, but also your experience, right? I mean, that whole question about how do you get experience in something when you don't have experience, right? How do you actually get that first opportunity to get experience? I'm going to actually begin, I think, with Desmond and Helen, because both of you have now come out of the closet as former lawyers who switched into entertainment. And I mean, how did you make that shift? Was there something that opened the door, someone who opened the door for you, especially again as Asian persons in the business?
Helen, do
Well, first of all, I actually have not escaped lawyering. I actually
pulling
still
you back
am
in.
a media and intellectual property lawyer, and also teach media law at NYU, which has been a phenomenal experience. So I'm definitely not here to say like lawyering is bad. No, you know, a lot of my closest friends decided to stick to lawyering and are doing very meaningful work and everything. So I just wanted to make that.
And they make
point.
more than $7 an hour, is the other thing.
Yeah.
So I hear, yes. But in terms of someone opening the door, yeah, I do agree very much that it has a lot to do in both the publishing context as well as in the film or television context, the kismet, and just being open enough and being wise enough to see and understand when those people or chances or opportunities happen to you, like walk into your life. So actually, there was, the way that I wound up with my current agent, for example. I had gone with one agent previously. Unfortunately, that person retired from the business of publishing, just from the business of literary agenting.
Kismet works both ways.
After,
Sometimes.
no, when she started a family, actually. When she became a mom, she decided, I am gonna,
But she made that choice. She wasn't
yes,
kicked out.
Yeah.
Right, she made that choice.
Important distinction.
Right, very. And so then I was kind of like, oh my goodness, it took me so long, and it was so
talking about
hard
Rachel.
to.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Okay, Rachel, yeah.
Right.
The person that Rachel is based off of. I see.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Exactly.
Ooh, catching up.
So,
I'm learning things better.
but to be clear, my book is a pure novel. It's a novel. It's fiction. It's fiction. I write fiction.
Rachel.
Any resemblance to people living or dead.
Yeah. Any similarity,
Yeah,
fairly
yeah.
coincidental. But when those people come into your life, just to recognize that and just be open to, who knows? You just never know what opportunity is gonna come knocking, and just to, be aware and I really wish that my younger self had known just to be more patient and not expect that, oh no, all is lost because this literary agent is giving up on the business of agenting. Now I'll never, it took me so long to find the one agent. And no, just to know that, hey, a little bit of patience, perseverance goes a long way.
So it's about, carpe diem, seizing the
Yeah,
day,
yeah, right.
seizing the moment, but also not letting go.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that totally makes sense.
I mean, that's pretty similar to exactly what you said was similar to my experience. Because I just got, my two tiny wizards were, I was not long for the legal career. I lasted 2 months. So it's never too early to quit something. And when I got out, I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. Sorry, swearing. Aussie. I'm Australian. I'm Australian, it's fine. I'm from the Antipodes. But I had two actor friends of mine who were in it already. A guy called Chris Pang, so he was in Crazy Rich Asians. Me and him came up, and then another guy, Dennis Dennis, who's now on High Potential on ABC. Go watch that right now. But they were both actors. I was not, and I went to help them with self-tapes because I was unemployed and had time. So I jumped in a room with them and I was like operating the camera, and then eventually they were like, "Why don't you just say some of these words too, eh?" And I was like, "Okay, fine." And then I did a scene, and then they beat me up. Like, they were like, "Hey man, that sucked. That was so bad. And specifically, here's why it was bad." And then they broke me down. And that was the whole process of like, that was my school. It was me in the room with these two other fellas. And we added a few people here and then lost some people there over time who we would just be so honest with each other. We'd sit there and do tapes for days on end. We'd spend like days on auditions sometimes and self-tapes. And just
Audition
be
tapes
so,
are a certain kind of
they
actor
are as well.
torture.
Yeah. But we were brutal with each other.
That makes it sound even worse.
But it was great. That was sort of our learning. Aussies, we
Wait,
don't.
so then
we
did
don't
their
beat on
agents
English.
submit you? Like, who submitted you?
They submitted me. They were my brothers in the original. They were like, we're going to slide your tape in along with our attachments.
Wow.
And that didn't go well because you're not meant to do that. And their agents got very angry.
Yeah, that's
And then eventually one of their agents got over their anger and was like, "Do you want a meeting?" So that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. I'm standing on the shoulders of people who like took insane risks for me, and also like taught me everything I know. And I also helped them as we went. You know, if they did a tape that sucked, I'd be like, "Hey man, that sucked." And you got to find those people, and you got to know those people who are going to, be honest with you, and not be kind, but not sugarcoat it. Because they're going to help you. Yeah.
I'd like to turn that over to you as well, Alex. How did you, I mean, it wasn't so much a pivot for you, but there was a moment, I'm sure, where you realized, hey, this is something that I can do. And there must have been, was there somebody who sort of told you that? It's like, hey, you can do this. This is an opportunity that you can actually seize.
I don't want this to sound too cheesy, but I would say that it's my partner, now husband. I met him working. I know it's
That's
I know it's awful. Sorry.
No, I've just met him. And
He's the most incredible guy. But I met him. Right? I met,
such a cool dude.
I met him. We were acting in a student film together. We auditioned for this student film, and we were cast opposite each other. And he's been my person along the way, especially when auditions turned to just self-tape around COVID, which is it's been a wild journey of auditioning, but now actors, a lot of us live in our heads, and we have no feedback, and we have nobody to bounce anything off of except for that one person who you're doing your self-tape with.
Yeah.
And they do have to be brutally honest with you, but they also have to support you and hold you up.
Yep.
And I've been really lucky that my self-tape partner is also my very solid, artistically minded, honest husband. Shout out to David, who is taking care of our two beautiful children right now and is not anywhere near this place, so I can do this and focus on this. But I would say my rock and that person that's keeping me going in those moments, those big dips that happen, is my husband, my partner.
It is fortunate to have somebody who is creative. It can be a problem to be in the same industry and in a relationship, but nevertheless, it means you have a feedback loop. And and how about yourself, Hollis? I know that it's not always a given that just because somebody is of your community, of your background, that they'll necessarily be that person who will reach down and pull you up. And we won't name names or anything. But we did share some stories about that. But Hollis, was there anybody who beyond that tiny wizard guy, really
I'd like to say for the record, if he ever sees this, but we hold Gandalf with a lot of respect. We really do.
I've never said the name.
He has since been retired, but he is so well respected. He is a wizard, literally at his job. He is one of the most magnificent focus pullers that have ever been around. So we say that with love.
What is pulling focus? I feel like that's
You know what? We'll talk. I can explain it later if anyone really cares and really wants to know what it is. I find it to be the hardest job on set, to be honest, next to what everyone else.
Because actors do this a lot.
Yeah,
We
it's a very, very
in and out of focus.
Sweating constantly. They're like,
yeah.
he's moving.
Oh yeah. That's exactly what it is. It is the most stressful job.
He's off his mark. He's off his mark.
Well, so we are actually at time, but I did want to actually open the floor up for questions from the audience if possible, and just take a couple if there's some hands going up already. Over here.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a junior here. So for me, I actually first started thinking about representation and diversity because I saw Crazy Rich Asians in 2018. Came out, started doing research, and now I'm designing a seminar thinking about representation on TV. So this is obviously something that means a lot to me. And I was wondering, what was the first time you guys really saw something on TV or in film that made you feel represented? And if there isn't an instance of like that sort of positive feeling of representation, what is a new piece of media that you feel like you wish you had? And I'm especially interested in hearing from you, Jeff, since you have a lot of knowledge about that. But yeah.
Well, thank you. Officially moderator, but happy to chime in. I'm going to say this just because it's a really unique circumstance for me in particular. I've written about film and television for many years, all the way back to when I first started out as a cultural critic, as a TV critic specifically. I wrote about a show called All American Girl, which starred a comedian named Margaret Cho, who actually happened to be kind of a friend and acquaintance and friend of mine. And I was tasked with writing that review because right? They're like, oh, we need an Asian person to write the review of this Asian show. And we don't have any, and you're there, so let's give this to you. And the unfortunate thing is, since I did know Margaret, I said to my editor, this is a great opportunity, big break, feature review, front cover of the publication, but I feel a little conflicted because if I don't like this, I want it to succeed since this is my friend. And also, it's the first show featuring an Asian American family in kind of, recent history, certainly my lifetime watching television. And I don't want to be part of the nail that is hammered through its throat. And he said, well, look, you have to make a decision. Do you want to be a journalist or do you want to be friends with celebrities? That's really what I'm telling you. And it was a hard choice. But again, I was a junior critic at a weekly newspaper in New York City, The Village Voice. And it was a big shot. So I decided to write the review. And I did not like the show, not because of Margaret, but because it wasn't Margaret. I literally said, this is a little harsh, but I said, the show feels a bit like a hostage proof of life video. I see her sitting on the stage. I know, like on this couch on sitcom TV. I know what she's like on stage. She's raunchy. She's queer. She's bawdy. She has so much energy that is not in this show. The next day after this piece ran, Margaret calls me up and says, I just saw the review. I'm going to tell you right now, all right? As one of the only critics who's Asian working on a regular beat, when my show is canceled, they're going to throw your piece on the table and say, even your community doesn't support you. And apparently that's what happened. So the show only lasted about 19 episodes, less than a season, and there was no show like it for another 2 decades. Which is ironic because the next show that did occur was a show called Fresh Off the Boat, which starred my son, Hudson Yang. And we often joke, it's like, I had to kind of like give a tribute to make up for, helping to kill that show. So I sacrificed my own child to the gods of Hollywood.
Oh my gosh.
But from Fresh Off the Boat came Crazy Rich Asians. From Crazy Rich Asians made Partner Track available. And we're in a very different world now. But it's also a very similar world. So I'm glad you're able to do that seminar. It's really interesting. Yeah.
So to your question about name a specific project that I remember as the first time I representation.
Partner Track
It
by
was
Helen Wan. Sorry.
I was in maybe 4th or 5th grade, and I don't know who in this room remembers these things called the ABC after school specials.
Oh, yeah.
There was an ABC after school special that I didn't know had been made. I just happened to be tuning in and saw an ABC after school special that starred an Asian American actress young actor who must have been, I don't know, maybe like 16, 17, and in it she was the love interest of a like tall white dude. And together they fought the law and they won. You know what I mean? Like they were the rebels of that high school, I think, or middle school perhaps. And this was back, I mean, this was really, really early to have that kind of thing be an ABC after school special. And I just remember it. And I remember just thinking about it. And wow, like that got made and I just saw it and I couldn't believe it, and I couldn't rewatch it because it was back, there was no streaming. It wasn't, I had no
on demand.
No, I didn't even have a VCR. We didn't own a VCR. And so, but I just remember. So that was it for me. And also, well, actually, coda to that, fresh off the boat, Hudson Yang, Jeff's son, start in it, and come full circle, right? My son, he just turned 12, he came home from school one day from his social studies class, and he was like, Mom, in class, we watched a snippet from this show. It's called Fresh Off the Boat. And I was like, oh, yeah, I actually happen to know. And he was like, and that was the first time that I've seen a authentic, credible portrayal of a kid like me, he said.
Wow.
And then he went and did a school in class. They were supposed to do like a talk back, feedback project kind of, reaction piece to you pick a piece. And he picked that. He picked Hudson's performance, actually.
Oh.
And he told me about, and I said, that's interesting. Why did you pick that, And my son said, that is the first. You don't see that. Mm-hmm. You don't see that very frequently, even now. In
I hope he was kinder to Hudson than I was to Margaret Cho. That's all. I think we have time for like maybe one or two more questions.
Hi, Irene Lin, class of 1998. Jeff Yang, my first internship was at A Magazine. So Jeff was one of my first bosses, and we actually invited him to Amherst College as well. And so I remember we went to Panda East together, I remember for dinner.
Yes.
So, but then Helen, I remember, Helen's book is the last fiction book I've literally read. But I remember when we talked about it, when I said, this would make such an awesome movie. So I'm just curious, that process for you to, why Netflix as a miniseries versus, because I'm sure you probably had a lot of different creative ways you could have gone. And I was wondering, how did you have a lot of offers? Was it obvious, no, I really want to do Netflix? I'm just fascinated by that. And also, why were you guys, was it the ratings? Or I don't know how these creative decisions are made. So anyway, I just want to have some insights into that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. But the truth, I'm not going to lie, the truthful answer is that I had very little control or just control over the process. I knew, obviously, your agents try to keep you in the loop. So I knew from both my literary agent in New York and also CAA that it had been optioned, that there was some fuzzy interest in it in Hollywood, again, right after Crazy Rich Asians, actually, right after that. So in that window of time. And, but no further info than that. And frankly, I had kind of written it off as, well, that would be so great if somehow the stars were to align and it were to be somehow made into a feature-length film or a TV series. But then years passed, options expire, as everyone knows, and then it was during COVID, so it was during pandemic times, and one fateful day, I got a wonderful phone call from my agent, and he said, "Hi, how are you?" And I hadn't spoken with him in a year, right? And he's like, "Are you sitting down?" I was like, I can. Okay. And he's like, "I think this time it's for real. I think it's going to get picked up, and I think this time it's really going to happen, and it's Netflix." And I was like, "Are you? Who is this? I demand to know who is this." And ultimately, it did happen. So
I want to ask a quick side question on that, because the book, and again, those of you who have read it or who will be reading it should know it's different, right? There are a lot of changes that were made in the process of getting it to the screen. as that was unfolding, I mean, how much were you aware of some of the changes were being made? And I mean, for instance, Z's character and the whole subplot,
Yeah.
it's new. It's like,
Right.
it's basically only for the screen. Rachel's character was different. The denouement of what happens with Ingrid is different. Ingrid herself is different. In the book, she's Taiwanese American. On screen, played by Arden Cho. She's Korean American, has a sister. So what does that process look like?
Well, again, I think it will not surprise anyone in this audience to hear that I did not have. I was a first-time debut novelist getting this made by Netflix. I had very little. No one. You don't get creative approvals, right? As a first time. So, but. To be fair, Netflix really did try to meaningfully involve me in consultation meetings, in pre-production, conferences and meetings to let me know, hey, look, we are thinking of making this change, this creative change, this content change, and here's why. And to the extent that you may or may not have any real, just strong, objections to this change A, change B, change C. Tell us now. Kind of like speak now, And yeah, as Jeff mentioned, one of the biggest changes is that her, the protagonist Ingrid, in the book is Taiwanese American, but when Arden got cast, they decided to make her Korean American. Arden herself is Korean American, and then when Arden and I met for dinner, Arden said, and the reason for that is that I want to be able to create and give the most credible and authentic performance that I possibly can for this series. I want to do it right, and I get that. I understand, so.
The sausage. It's very difficult to make, and most people don't see it. All right, let's take one last question. Maybe something for the folks on the other side. Anybody else? Oh, here.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Gazzeno, class of '06. I want to connect these stories that we've heard today to some of the conversations we've been having throughout the day. I really appreciate this theme of kind of stepping off of a path that you were on and how that interacts with the expectations of you. And some of the students, as we were trying to do some career mentorship, were like, well, so if I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, what do I tell my parents? So what did you tell your parents?
Oh my God.
You quit your job and you don't tell them for 3 months and pretend that you still have a job.
So that's definitely one way to do it.
That's why you spend your time at your reprobate friend's house doing self-tapes and pretending you're a lawyer. Still. No, look, I think we give our parents, it's a really hard conversation to keep your patience with because Asian parents can be hard. Again, that's why I didn't want to say anything. But I think the way I tackled that conversation eventually when it did happen was just being as patient as I could. There is a version of me in that conversation that fires up and like cuts ties and does all that. But I really had to dig down and be like, every single thing they do is for my benefit and because they love me and for my advancement. And even when they're screaming in your face, you have to be like, everything that they're saying right now is benefit. They just love me. Okay, Dad, here's the thing. And if I just sticking to that North Star really, really helped. And that's not going to be true for everyone. Sometimes parents do just suck. I was lucky enough to not be on the end of that. But I think if you try to approach it with that much goodwill and good faith as possible, I think you get the best version of it that can happen for you. Or at least that has been mine and a few other friends' experience. So, and it's not easy. And there were still like rifts for a few years afterwards. Like I couldn't talk to my dad in the same way. We had a very liminal relationship. But, I think it set the basis for it. And we have a really great relationship now. So I think it set the basis to mend that. He really just needed me to kowtow at a certain point. you know, I'd made my choice, but he also needed to feel respected as an Asian male, as an Asian father. And playing that card, I think, was what kept our relationship intact. So,
It is shocking, though, how many Asian American and Asian diaspora actors are like, oh, I started as a lawyer, started as an accountant, I started as an engineer, and then eventually switched gears only after they'd kind of said to their parents, look, I tried your way, now I'm going to try my way. Don't hate me, don't hurt me. And I mean, going to Georgetown, it's like Georgetown, and then you're going to give that up and go and pull focus?
My mom was, I was almost 40, and my mom still said, I don't understand. And that was 20 years, you know, almost 20 years later. You know, so kind of what he's saying, I think the best advice I could give you as a student who may straddle the fence at some point to what your parents want versus what you want, and in this current climate, is you have to be patient. You also have to be patient with yourself because you're still learning who you are. And like to just sort of, you know, I just went to this great panel and they talked about like being a lawyer and a doctor, and now they work in film and television. Doesn't mean that that's easy, but it also doesn't mean that being a lawyer or a doctor is easy either. So as a parent, even with my kids, is I say to them, like, if you love something and your parents love you as well, at some point those things kind of merge, right? 25 years doing this business, if my mother was still alive, she would still say, I have no idea what you do. I don't know why you went to Georgetown. I don't know why you studied what you studied. I bought a house in New York. She still said, well, can I move next door? But she didn't care what I did, right? So it at some point, it does kind of balance itself out. But as a student, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is, like he said, be patient with yourself, be patient with your parents, but also be honest, right? Because the worst thing you can do is go and become a lawyer and a doctor and hate your job. The best thing you can do is at least fight through that and go for what you really want, because that will bring your true self out. And they can't deny that. Like, that's just being honest about it. So that's kind of how I see it.
You want to take us home, Alex?
So, practical advice. If you're up against this with your parents, what I did was I gave my family a timeline. I'm going to try this for 2 years, and we're going to see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, I'm going to law school. Don't worry, guys. 2 years. So that's how it started. And then it became 3 years. And then it just like, and then you sort of, you
warm them up to it?
Yeah, you just so that's the practical advice.
Yep,
But I mean, the truth is, like, again, if you're following your North Star, God willing, you have parents that see you are on your journey, you are finding yourself, you are individuating, you are breaking away from the generational pressures that in different ways, from different cultures, we all feel. As a someone who very much grew up in a very sort of conservative, Jewish, military, lawyer-y leaning family, the pressure was very real to become a lawyer. And it was very hard to go against what I knew were my parents' wishes. But yeah, giving yourself a little bit of timeline, giving yourself that wiggle room, and also giving yourself the grace that your parents, they're living this life for the first time. They don't really know what they're doing either. See, I know this because I'm a mom now. And in the acting world, you fake it till you make it. Well, kind of like that's mom life too. Like,
life will stop.
It's just life. You fake it till you make it. Just, everyone's gone a journey. And recognizing that your parents are on their journey with what they expect of themselves and of you, like that kind of helps that moment where we start to, follow our callings. So that would be that's what I have to say about that.
Fake it till you make it. All right, thank you guys so much, and thank you for
Hollywood.
You guys were fantastic.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.